Hey guys, we're here in the bootmod3 room. We're going to be going through the BM3 FlexFuel Kit install on the Supra behind me. As you know, we released our custom ROM for the Gen 2 vehicles for both the B48 and the B58, containing map switching, flex fuel, anti-lag, in-dash ethanol content checking. So all of that fun stuff comes into play once you have the hardware on the car, specifically to do with flex fuel functionality. So we released 2 new hardware kits for these cars. For the Supra, you have to install the FlexFuel Kit in the engine bay. It goes in the back of the engine bay. On the other cars, you have 2 options. You're gonna go on the OEM Fuel Hat unless you modified your fuel hat to add more custom lines to it, to do port injection, for example, if you need to push that fueling. Otherwise, if you haven't modified it, that's the location that you will be installing it in. It is the best spot for these kits. It's very stealthy. You don't get to see anything in the car or in the engine bay once it's installed. So that is the preferred spot. If you did modify the fuel hat, there won't be any room on top of the fuel hat to put this in, so you'll basically go with the engine bay location installation kit. In that case, it goes on the fuel line in between your high pressure pump and the low pressure line. So let's get into it, and we'll show you everything about the install. So basically at the beginning, anytime you're dealing with any modifications on the car, especially if you're going in and changing stuff in the fuel system, you want to go in your trunk, pop the battery so that there's no power in the car. You're not going to get any sparks and, have a fire suddenly. So go ahead and remove that battery ground off the battery, put it to the side, and you can come back to the engine bay and we'll continue the install there. Once in front of the engine bay, you would pop the engine cover off. There's rubber grommets underneath the engine cover, so those you just pull up on the engine cover and it comes up. So next, you'll go to the insulation. You'll see an insulation cover in the back of the engine bay. You want to remove that so that it opens up space for you to work with during this install. Next, you're going over to the left side or the passenger side of the engine bay to your high pressure pump. There's an electrical connector on the pump and you want to disconnect it. Right next to the high pressure pump, you have the ignition coil for cylinder 6. It's the last coil in the back of the engine bay. You want to disconnect that electrical connector. Next, you want to take a rag and place it basically around the inlet to the high pressure pump, and we'll be disconnecting the high pressure line from the inlet to the high pressure pump. Next, you want to undo the nut that's holding the high pressure hard line on the high pressure pump and just basically loosen it. After that step, you want to go to the little bracket that is holding down the high pressure line. There's a screw there. It's an E6 Torx socket that you need, and you'll remove the little bracket holding that line. In the next step, you basically want to disconnect that hard line from the flexible line. There's a quick disconnect there. There's a gray locking tab that is holding the 2 things in place. You want to remove the gray locking tab, and then you'll be able to disconnect the hard line from the flexible line. You can take the hard pressure line, put it to the side. We won't need it anymore during this install. You'll need it if you're going back to stock at any point. You want to keep this line somewhere handy. At this point, you want to unbox the BM3 FlexFuel Kit and use the fuel line and the metal fitting on it. The metal fitting, you can disconnect it from the fuel line and install it at the inlet of the high pressure pump. You'll want to use a 17mm wrench to tighten the fitting on the high pressure pump. Next, you can go ahead and plug in the line onto that fitting, and the other side of the line will plug in on the BM3 FlexFuel Kit. When you're plugging in the fuel line, it's a 5/16 inch quick connect fitting, so make sure when you push it in that you hear a click. So at this point, we have the high pressure pump connected with our fuel line to the BM3 FlexFuel Kit. Next step, you want to connect the BM3 FlexFuel Kit to the factory OEM flexible fuel line. Once you've connected the factory line to the other side of the FlexFuel Kit, make sure to put back the gray locking tab. Once it's completed, installation of the fuel lines on both sides of the FlexFuel Kit. This will complete the assembly of the actual FlexFuel Kit hardware in the back of the engine bay. In the next step, you'll be doing the electrical portion of the install. BM3 FlexFuel Kit comes with 2 harnesses as part of the kit. One of the harnesses is a 3-wire harness to power up the FlexFuel sensor that's part of the kit. So in order to get going with this, you want to remove the round plastic grommet and fish the wiring through that grommet for the 3-pin sensor wire. Next, you want to remove the perforated cowl cover on the passenger side. Once you remove the perforated cover on the top of the cowl, you will see there's a square opening, or a square cover actually, that covers the rubber grommet that you'll use to fish the wire into the cabin. Next, you want to fish the 3-pin FlexFuel sensor wire through the opening and continue to the next step. Now that you have the FlexFuel sensor harness fished through the firewall, you want to connect it to the actual sensor. In the next step, we're going into the car and we'll be finishing the electrical install inside the car on the passenger footwell side. BM3 FlexFuel Kit connects to what is called the body domain controller. It sits in the passenger footwell side. So we want to get access to that first by removing the plastic cover that's underneath the glove box. Next, you want to remove the lower center door trim panel. And as the final step, you want to remove the kick panel on the passenger side. Now that we have all the plastic covers out of the way, you want to pull back on the carpet, pull it a little bit towards the front seat. Once you pull the carpet, you'll be able to see the body domain controller and all the wiring and connectors on the right side of the passenger footwell. At this point, once the carpet's off to the side, you'll be able to see the wiring harness that you fished through the firewall, and you'll want to pull on it and get some length into the cabin. Next, you want to take the BM3 controller out of the box and you'll be connecting the 3-pin connector to the board. Next, we're connecting the other harness to the body domain controller. In the next step, we'll be connecting the BM3 controller over to the body domain controller on the car. On the right side of the passenger footwell, you'll see the body domain controller and you'll see there are a number of connectors going into it. You're going to the top row, you'll see the one labeled with CON7, connector 7. There's a tab on the white connector which you want to undo and unplug the connector from the board. Next, you want to pull out the small black sub-connector that sits inside of the white connector that was on CON7. Once the black sub-connector is out, you want to slide in the female sub-connector that is provided on the BM3 FlexFuel harness. This part has all the blue wires on it. Pins 18 and 36 should be the ones going in first. The male side on the BM3 FlexFuel harness will plug in to the black sub-connector that you pulled out of the connector 7. Make sure to line up pin 1 on the boot mode male side connector and line it up with pin 18 on the OEM connector. If this was an F series B58, we would be done at this point. But on the G series, BMW has moved the terminal 15 or the ignition on to another connector. So you want to go to connector 3 that sits in the row below connector 7. In order to get easier access to connector 3, you want to remove or move aside the plastic cover protecting the BDC. Next, you want to undo the tab on connector 3 and disconnect it. Next, you want to remove the blue sub-connector and de-pin the wire on pin 1. Next, you want to insert the red wire with the female pin into pin 1 on the blue sub-connector. The other side of the red wire on the boot mode harness is a male pin. You want to pin that male pin into the female pin that you pulled out from the blue sub-connector. Once you've connected the 2 pins, you'll want to apply some insulation tape. Next, you want to connect connector 3 back in its slot on the body domain controller and put the white cover back on. At this point, you can put the BM3 FlexFuel board in the back somewhere, maybe on a piece of Velcro so it's secure and doesn't move. You can zip tie the remainder of the harness. At this point, the BM3 FlexFuel Kit's installed. You want to start the motor and check for any fuel leaks. Once you've checked for fuel leaks and confirmed there are none, you can go back into the cabin, put back the plastic trim, and go into the engine bay and put the cowl back on, put the insulation cover back on, and put your engine cover back on, and you're done.